Hello again, second year. I trust that you're well. Today we have a lesson based on rock and roll music, which is our second lesson in our rock and pop unit. Just to remind you that this lesson that is on Satchel 1 is for those pupils who didn't attend a live lesson this week. So if you were there during the live lesson, then this is just a repeat of what you've already learned and the same lesson. But if you were unable to attend for any reason, then this is for you. Today, we are going to revise the difference between rock and pop that we learned about last week. We're going to learn about rock and roll music as a new style, and then we're going to check our learning with a listening quiz at the end of the lesson. I've also put on the word of the week as active. Now, I want this to apply to help your mental and physical health. Now, I know the majority of the time just now is spent in front of a computer screen or on your tablet, for example, so just by getting up, going a wee walk outside, although it might be raining at the moment as I'm recording this, but trying to get out as much as you can, get some fresh air, keep yourself active, will keep your mental and physical health intact. What I'd like to do first is to complete this little starter activity for me. So there's going to be 4 questions, and they are, well, there might be 5 questions actually. So number 1, name the instrument, and there it is there. Be as specific as you can be. Number 2, which style of music features extended instrumental solos? Number 3, which style of music has catchy lyrics with a beat to dance to? Number 4, what is this piece of technology called? And number 5, how many beats is this note worth? And you're going to have about 3 minutes to complete this, your answer. And I'll put on some music in the background while you do so. Okay, so keep those answers for me, and you're going to submit them with the answers to the quick quiz at the end to show my homework. So to think about our second learning intention, which is going to be around rock and roll music. Now, rock and roll was popular in the 1950s and it started in America. So the official definition of rock and roll is American music which grew from the combined styles of jazz, blues, gospel and country, as I said, in the 1950s. So combining all those different styles of music, it kind of led to this new style that we have, which is called rock and roll. Rock and roll music features the electric guitar very prominently, as it was developed around this time as well, which meant it was used a lot in this style of music. One of the most famous people that we have in rock and roll music is Elvis Presley, and I'm sure you've heard of his name before. He's probably one of the most famous musicians who's ever existed, and very few people across the world will ever have not heard of Elvis Presley. So let's have a wee listen to some rock and roll music, and it's Jailhouse Rock by Elvis. So very prominent electric guitar, as well as that kind of rock and roll feel that we have from the 1950s. Now, when we talk about music being available for all, right now we probably think in ways that we access music through our phones, YouTube, Spotify, different apps, for example. Also, we didn't have that in the 1950s. But what they did have were a number of technological developments that allowed them to play rock and roll music despite not having any digital media. For example, our streaming software that we have nowadays. So what they did have was vinyl records, which I'm sure you've seen before. They've actually come back in almost like fashion and in society, where people have record players. This is when they first became very popular in the 1950s, and Elvis sold lots of different records at that time. We also have the jukebox, which you might have seen lots of different TV shows or films. In the 1950s in America, you would find them in diners, for example. And basically the way they work is you put a coin in and you'd select the song that you would like to hear. And by paying for the music, it would play out of the jukebox. And lastly, in the 1950s, we did have the radio, so we'd still be able to hear the music being played and broadcast on the radio system. Another key point of rock and roll music was the fact that it started to become very important in terms of teenage culture, which is you guys. So in the 1950s, teenage culture started to develop, and rock and roll was the first style of music which began to appeal to this new younger audience. It was often disapproved of by the older generation, because if you can think before that, in the 1920s, the 1930s, 1940s, the main styles of music that they listened to was blues and jazz. So this was moving forward, and they had this new electric guitar as an instrument, which wasn't traditional like our trumpet or our saxophone or whatever it might be. So by having the electric guitar and this new style of music, a lot of the older generation thought it was a kind of sense of rebellion for youth culture. Okay, just to finish us off for this lesson, I'm going to play you 5 different examples, and I'd like you to identify whether you're listening to a piece of rock, a piece of pop, or a piece of rock and roll music. Okay, here is question 1. Question 2. Question 3. Question 4. And question 5. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is to upload your answers to Satchel 1 from the starter questions as well as our quick quiz. Now, there might be less live lessons just because we, as a music department, are now back in the building to support our senior pupils in order to help them with their SQE courses. So there, as a result, it means that our staff are going to be in the building and won't be able to do live lessons as they'll be working with pupils in the school. But I look forward to working with you next week, and I'll see you then.